everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Lauren Sergy. Lauren is an expert in the art of speaking and communication with a particular passion for the art, science, and alchemy of interpersonal communication, which she will explain in our conversation, I promise you. All of her techniques and ideas are drawn from her rigorous experience, both professionally and academically, which include roles in radio, corporate communications, classic rhetoric, and the performing arts. And in today's conversation, we are going to touch on a wide range of topics in order to help improve all of our speaking and listening abilities to help make us well-rounded, more successful communicators. So she's going to start by talking about how we can speak the language of leaders. That will lead us into applying her 3 C's of leadership communication. Because I'm a nerd and I had to ask, we got into her 3 favorite rhetorical concepts. We're going to talk about the process of removing roadblocks during conversations and so much more. This is a great conversation. I'm really excited to share it with you all today. Thank you so much for being here. And while you're here, please, we have to ask, we appreciate it if you would subscribe to the show, like the show, share it with your network, leave a review, leave us your feedback. We really would appreciate it, as we would also appreciate you taking a few minutes to visit our sponsors. Really quick, you can head over to humantel.com. That's where you can enter the code INQUASIVE25 for 25% off the best-in-class online training to recognize when people's emotions are shifting by accurately interpreting changes in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. I highly recommend it. Everything you need to research and know is there at humantel.com. For the professional interviewers, please head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can get all your questions answered about the International Association of Interviewers, the membership requirements and opportunities at both the national level and the local chapter level, as well as that's where you can get all your questions answered for the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. And finally, please check out inquasive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs our clients ask us to facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and more in order to teach them how to uncover hidden value in all of their high impact conversations. We really appreciate you being here for another week. Thank you so very much. So without further ado, we introduce to you Lauren Sergy. Hello, Lauren. It is great to meet you. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
It's a pleasure to be here, Michael. I'm doing great. I'm really looking forward to this.
I am as well. And in preparing for the conversation, I only had about 900 ideas for things that we can talk about. So we'll see if we can get the most important ones worked in. I really enjoy reading about your approach to communication. I really enjoy reading about it from a leadership perspective as well. So if I may, I think that's where I would like to start the conversation today. You talk a lot about the language of leadership. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start by asking you to explain to all of us, what is the language of leadership?
The language of leadership has a couple of different names. The one that most people will recognize is executive presence. But there's a lot that goes into that. And the reason why I call it the language, executive presence is the language of leadership, is because it is the deliberate, hopefully deliberate, you want some control over it, but the deliberate unspoken signals that you're sending to people through body language, vocal tone, mode of dress, the way that you interact, that is constantly reinforcing in their minds, this is the right person to be leading us. Not this is the smartest person in the room, not this is the toughest person in the room. This is the right person to be leading us right here, right now. And it's a language because there are some consistent traits that people with really strong executive presence communicate. They consistently communicate gravitas. They tend to communicate a lot of energy and attention and focus on the people that they're with. My big 3 C's is they communicate confidence, they communicate control, self-mastery, not necessarily control over others, but self-control, and they communicate clarity. And that is done through the way that we behave, through the way that we speak. So if you know a few of those deliberate signals, you can start to incorporate them into how you speak to and interact with people. By the same token, just as with language, just as with the way that we actually talk, there's also a ton of room for your personality, for your style. So two leaders will not have the same executive presence, but they will still both be able to use the language of it to communicate that they've got the chops.
All great points right out of the gate. Thank you. And I do love how you stopped to pause on the control. It's not the old school, we're controlling others. It's that we have the self-awareness, which we could probably go on for hours about people who develop self-awareness and those who it escapes entirely. But being able to control ourselves, our emotions, our reactions, our communications. So another great point about personality, it's something that I'm sure we've all seen, is someone who is trying to emulate maybe a mentor or emulate another successful person or emulate another individual that they've seen. And when we work really hard to emulate someone, we end up almost looking like a car accident in progress because it's not who we are. It's not how we naturally behave. So the illustrators don't line up with what we're saying. The tone of voice doesn't match the words. We're trying too hard to be something that we're not. How do you work with leaders to develop their own leadership language, their own executive presence, so they do hit on these important behaviors, but in a way that reflects themselves?
A few years ago, well, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, everyone was trying to speak like Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Everyone. That's what leaders wanted to look like, right? We're gonna do it like Steve Jobs. And it's great for Steve Jobs and it's great for a lot of other people too, his thing. But it's not good for everyone. Does that mean that you can't look to him for inspiration? Certainly not. You can, absolutely. But the big thing when you are trying to figure out your style, your personality, how to convey what it is you're trying to convey is to be able to balance out what works for the people that you're speaking to, what you actually have to project and have to telegraph, and what feels natural or feels right to you. So there is a very strong element in all communication, certainly in executive presence, of performance. Performance, by the way, does not mean, if you're performing, it doesn't mean you're being disingenuous. It means you're being really conscious of the signals you're sending to other people and ensuring that they can pick up on that, because people don't live inside our heads, right? They can only interpret what we show on the outside, unless they know us really, really well. So understanding the vibe that you get from other leaders that you like. So when you see, whether it's Steve Jobs or any other number of leaders that you might see on TV, pick your favorite. I'm a big Seth Godin fan. When you see someone and you're thinking, oh, that really speaks to me. Quite often, whatever it is they're doing that speaks to you, that works for you, that makes you sit up and pay attention, is reflecting something that you personally value and that you likely already have. So if you find like you're just magnetically attracted towards a leader, look at them, study how they speak, look at what they do, but then dissect it and pick it apart. And the big question is, what are they doing? Why is it working? How is it working? Run through those questions, then try it out. When you're trying out whatever it is, whether it is walking like Brene Brown or interacting with the audience like Ed Sullivan, you can pull from any era and any genre that you want. Whatever it is, check in with yourself to see whether it feels right. Not whether it feels easy or if you're instantly really good at doing that, just whether or not it kind of sits well on you and makes you think, yeah, I like this. This works for me. If you try something out and it feels absolutely wrong, I don't like that at all. It could be a cadence, a manner of speaking. It could be a manner of holding yourself. It could be the kinds of stories you tell. That's an indication that it's counter to your personality. If you try to stick with it, other people will pick up on the fact that you're uncomfortable. So that's fine. It works for that person, doesn't work for me, ditch it. But then still keep trying the stuff that really works for you. An example of that personally is that for years I was in Toastmasters, of course, as many, many speakers are. And Toastmasters has a lot of competitions, a lot of speech competitions. And in my district, if you wanted to win a speech competition, you had to tell a very emotionally affected story. There had better be an illness or an injured animal or something like that somewhere in your speech to make it work for you. And I looked at a lot of really emotional, really moving speakers. I was trying to do what they did. I was trying to put those stories in. But in the end, I mostly relate to people and communicate through humor. And the sob stories came across as very insincere. And I have a lot of acting training behind me, right? I can pull it off, but it always came across as insincere. It wasn't my style. You know what? That's fine. Ditch it. Don't use it. So you should be looking at how other leaders communicate. You should be pulling it apart. You should be trying it out in front of the bathroom mirror, playing with it. But you should not say, they're a big, important person, therefore they are doing it right. Therefore, I have to imitate that. That's not how you study this craft.
And even what you said right there at the very end, the word imitate, like trying it on, does it work for me? Adapting it to myself is different than just straight up imitating what somebody else does. So even that is a great differentiation right there at the end. And I also liked how you mentioned it's okay to be different for different audiences within ourselves. Like, what does the audience need to experience? Personally, one of the things that will drive me nuts, one of the probably billion things that drives me nuts, if we're being honest, is this thought that, like, to be authentic, you have to be the same all the time. That couldn't be any further from the truth. There's core elements to who we are, and we can be authentic to ourselves, but we can adapt that depending on the context of the situation that we're in. And I love how you really talked about focusing on what does the audience need? What does the audience need to get from this interaction? Earlier used a word that I forgot to highlight, but I want to make sure we go back and do deliberate. Things that we are doing deliberately. It doesn't mean that they're insincere. They could be strategic, but they reflect the message, the relationship, the outcome, the totality of the circumstances that we're all going through together. A bit of a broad question, take it in any direction that you would like, please. Are there categories or groups of deliberate behaviors that you see to be more effective for certain audiences?
I find that it has to do a little bit more with the circumstance that the audience is in. But in terms of different audiences, yes. And the way that I'm going to categorize this is, like I said, broad strokes, big generalizations, big stereotyping going on here, is that you do get in different industries or within different skill sectors, kind of a personality and a culture.
Yeah.
And it's good to know what that personality and that culture is. So if you are the CEO of a big research and development company in some kind of industrial widget, you're going to have your engineers. You're going to have your communications and marketing people. You're going to have your senior leadership team. Those different groups are going to have their own different personalities, and you will probably be able to predict what some of them are. The engineers are typically pretty straightforward. They like to cut to the chase. They are very technically minded. They go for precision, and they frequently get lost in the weeds. The marketing folks tend to be a little more on the creative side. They try out a lot of different stuff. They often get very harried and very panicked as they're trying to figure out messaging for 18 different people. Your senior leadership team, I haven't yet found, by the way, one consistent personality type among senior leadership. It varies greatly, but if you've worked with them a little bit, you'll know what the vibe of the group is like. So depending on that, you're going to need to put on that sort of hat. When we're leveraging executive presence, when you're really doing the language of leadership, a big thing you're reflecting, you mentioned it before, audience needs. By the way, for all of you listening and watching, whenever we say audience, we mean literally anyone you're speaking to, anyone in any circumstance. So the audience's needs kind of dictate where you have to go. And with executive presence, rhetorically, it's known as ethos, they're checking to see, do you share or at least understand and complement our values? So if you're speaking with that engineering group and you're being vague, you're being general, you're not getting to the point quickly for them, the engineering group will say, that person doesn't get me. They don't get us. So communication now becomes more difficult. When I am giving workshops to different sectors, I speak with a lot of financial people. They tend to be very goal-oriented, bigger personalities, highly competitive, driven, high octane, high intensity. I have to show some of that. I got to be blunt, straightforward, be willing to take a few punches because they'll throw some barbs, see if I can roll with it. Show that you can punch at their level. That's important. That's how I show that they get them. When I am speaking with the education sector, much more controlled, much more democratic, not as competitive. That isn't to say that it doesn't exist, but they don't show it because that is not the value of that group. So I bring down my intensity to match that level because now I'm demonstrating I get where you are, I understand who you are, and I can respect that. So that's going to come out in things like your word choices, your dress choices, tone of voice, how quickly you speak, all of that sort of thing. And you're figuring out what their personality is, what their value is, so you can show that you understand them.
Amen to all of that. Creating the experience that our audience, and that could be an audience of one person in our office, to your point, or an audience of thousands of people sitting in front of you, but curating the experience so the audience gets what they need out of it. I love everything that you said there. And you just dropped a little rhetorical reference, which I want to come back to because now you've got the nerd in me all kinds of spark to have that conversation. But I want to come back for just a second because you just talked about levels. And if we're communicating to people on different levels, then they have different expectations, they have different goals.
Yep.
They have different fears and levels of risk tolerance. So as we are talking about executives in the language of leadership and executive presence, from your expertise and experience, what are some of the things that they absolutely, without a doubt, must keep in mind when they are talking to people who are beneath them on the org chart?
They have got to remember that anytime you're speaking up the ladder, it could be a frontline worker to their supervisor, it could be a senior leader to the CEO. Anytime you are speaking up the ladder, that person is taking a higher risk. So that means that they're already on guard. Unless you have got a really phenomenal working relationship, they're probably already on guard. They're going to be a little more careful. They will be reactive and observant to the signals that you're sending back, and they will be very sensitive to the way that you follow through on the conversation. And that follow through will dictate how the next conversation goes and whether or not they're willing to speak to you. So it's so important for leaders at any single level to remember that they're taking the bigger risk. So if they seem hesitant, it means you have not signaled to them that they are allowed to come and tell you that something is wrong and not fear punishment. They're allowed to come tell you that they screwed up and you're going to help them fix it instead of immediately bringing down the hammer, unless it's chronic, in which case you've got an HR issue, not a communication issue. It happens. So you need to be able to signal to them that it's okay for them to come to you and speak to you frankly.
I love all of that. And that has to be executed, that has to be illustrated over time through multiple experiences, through multiple conversations that the leader needs to take the initiative of. The old open door policy just says, I care enough about you to leave my door open in case you want to walk through it at a time that I'm not too busy. We actually have to go find them. I really love the way that you said the person communicating up the ladder, the lower rank, if you will, takes on all the risk. It is so true. It's 100% true. I love the way that you say that. I like to joke with audiences and say that your employees and your customers have been Mirandized because they have the right to remain silent. They know anything they say can and will be held against them at your very first opportunity. And you nailed it. You nailed it 100%. And a lot of times leaders have that sense of entitlement where you should just tell me, I need to know. And that entitlement trap blows everything up. So I hope everybody just listened and took notes and registered that when people are communicating up to you, they own all the risk.
I love how you called it entitlement, Michael. I really, really do. For some leaders, it is a sense of entitlement. And part of that is, you got someone with that kind of boldness in their personality, they might be more inclined to rise to the top, but then you have to learn that what is true for you is not true for the people that you're speaking to. For a lot of leaders, it's that they simply forget what it's like to be on those lower rungs. This will happen often in other areas of communication, and certainly it does reflect listening skills as well, just coming back to the theme of your podcast, where if we spend a lot of time in one role or in one area of expertise, we forget that other people don't see things the same way. They don't understand things. They don't know things the same way that we know them. And for a leader, for a CEO or anyone at a high level who is used to being able to speak very freely, they forget what it's like to be afraid to do so. So it really takes a lot of conscious empathy to put yourself in your people's shoes, to ensure that, yeah, I understand where they're coming from. And it's not enough to say my door is open. I find with a lot of leaders, they go through the motions, they say the right words, but the follow through isn't there. My door is open, but did I come to that person's desk and actually say, hey, that was a really tough assignment. What's going on? My door is open, but am I actually there when they're ready to speak? Are there consequences after they tell me something? I have personally worked under a few leaders where their door was always open and there was a mallet behind that desk waiting for you if you came to say anything wrong. So the behaviors have to be consistent with what you are asking people to do. Your behaviors, need to be consistent.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of times I think leaders look at themselves as hopefully setting the bar. Like if I perform to such a level, then my team, they might not get as high as I do, but they get close. And as long as they get close enough, I'm good. I'm setting the bar. What they also don't realize is they're also setting the floor.
Yeah.
So if they're behaving in a way that's setting the wrong message, well, then if my leader can get away with that, I can get away with it even worse. And so now we end up actually encouraging the behavior that we're trying to get away from.
Yep. Communication culture is always set from the top within the organization. Always, always, always. And when I'm talking about a lot of empathy and all of that, it doesn't mean you need to be a huggy bear. Doesn't mean you need to be everybody's best friend. Very often, when we're looking at executive presence and those ethos signals, people don't necessarily want their best friend running the ship, right? They need someone who has the confidence, the certainty, the control, all of that good stuff. But part of your ability to say, I've got the right stuff, is that you can handle their mess as well. So you don't need to be the fuzziest person on the block, but you do need to be consistent. You need to be open. You want to be predictable. That's part of the consistency. Can your people predict how you're going to react when they come to talk to you? The idea of the really dynamic, boisterous, unpredictable, might hug you one day and throw a plate at your head the next sort of leader, that might sound great. It makes for great sound bites in the media. It makes for a really difficult communication environment. If they can't predict your reaction, they're not going to want to come and talk to you.
Again, amen. I can't stress that point you just made enough. In unpredictability, that's the right word, right? Being unpredictable. Unpredictability breeds anxiety. Anxiety breeds stress. It's going to shut people down. It's going to get their guard much higher. That consistency is so important. So before I forget, because now this is the second time that you brought it up, you recall or reference rhetorical aspects and elements of speaking as well, which I find fascinating. So if we're talking about creating executive presence, if we're talking about communicating our message clearly to our audience without going through the entire list or taking us all the way back to ancient Greece, what are some of your favorite rhetorical concepts that leaders can apply in their high impact conversations? We started with ethos. We can go from there.
Ethos. And we can't take it. I am contractually obligated to mention Aristotle at least once every time I speak to anyone about this. I find that understanding the three pillars of rhetoric, the three rhetorical appeals, are what really help people start to pick apart their communication and think about it more analytically. So we've mentioned ethos. That is the big thing of you are communicating and speaking. You're working with people based on their values, their perception of your reputation and credibility. Do you have the right stuff? Are you signaling that? And it's mostly nonverbal communication. But in order to nail the ethos thing, you have to understand the values, the context, the personalities of the people that you're working with or speaking to. Next up is logos. That is being able to appeal to people's sense of, roughly translated, it's logic. But it's not logic as in truth. And that's an important differential. Because many people, they say, well, I told them the truth. I gave them a very reasonable answer. No, that's your version of reasoning. When we're talking rhetorically, we mean how do they put the pieces together in their head? What makes them say A plus B equals C? Conspiracy theorists use just as much logos in their thinking as hardline scientists. But it's a very different twist as to what gets them to make the connections. So you want to understand how the people you're speaking to think. What evidence do they find is important? What do they already believe about the situation? That's really critical. And then the third one, which is the one that tends to make people uncomfortable, is pathos, which is communicating to people in order to appeal to their emotion. This is where we get into the territory of, well, I'm not a huggy bear. I'm not the emotional type, or this feels like manipulation. You need to be able to work with emotion because emotion is the first mental filter through which all information passes. The first thing we're asking if we're looking at you, listening to you, whatever, is how does this make me feel? Because based on that alters our interpretation of the information. Does this information make me feel reassured or anxious? Does this make me feel confused or clear? So knowing where your group is coming from emotionally and what they need to feel by the time that you're done interacting with them is also key to planning out your communication. They are coming in feeling anxious. I need them to feel reassured. How am I going to behave? How am I going to speak to them? How am I going to listen to them to take them on that journey? They're coming in feeling pretty pleased with themselves, but they done screwed up and I need to read the riot act. I need them to feel attentive, maybe fired up, maybe a little worried by the end of this conversation. How am I going to get them to that place in a way that doesn't pull back on their trust in me? How do we go on that little emotional journey? Those three pillars of rhetoric, and it's an entire branch of academic study. You can go real deep into this rabbit hole. But starting to dig into those three things allow you to think of communication more analytically and more strategically. And I feel always that it's a very honest way of approaching and a very empathetic way of approaching communication, because at all times you are trying to figure out what your audience needs from you to get to this place that you both need to go.
Thank you. And you mentioned that strategic approach. That is what had me the most interested in our conversation today, was seeing what a strategic approach you take to conversation. And it's not, I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm just going to say it. This is who I am. They need to align themselves with me. I truly appreciate your strategic approach to communication. And even when you mention manipulation, and before I finish making my point on this, I would welcome for you to interject. My personal opinion is that manipulation in and of itself is a neutral term. We manipulate people all day long. It comes down to the intentions that we have, the techniques that we use, and whether or not the people we are, quote unquote, manipulating are willing or have somehow signed on or are aware of what's going on. So there are ethical ways that we manipulate people all day long. I'm not getting my 8-year-old son out of the house if I don't manipulate him. But then there are certainly unethical, coercive means of manipulation as well.
100%. 100%. It is all communication strategies are morally neutral. It depends completely on the intent of the person using them. Are they doing it to deceive? Are they doing it to trick? Are they doing it to bully, et cetera, or are they communicating so that the other person comes to the conclusion or comes to the idea that they're working with, right? If you're trying to force the other person to think a certain way and working against them or working against their interests, that's bad, right? So check in with yourself. And I find most people, with the exception of a few sociopaths among us, don't want to use this for ill. But it really does come down to your own moral compass, the use of any kind of communication strategy. And a great thing, because it popped into my mind, so I'm going to run with this for a minute, Michael.
Go.
When you're talking about communication strategy, a really handy thing to do is when communication isn't going the way you want, when people aren't speaking to you, when they're not listening to you, when you feel that there's some kind of disconnect or block, just using those 3 rhetorical principles, the rhetorical appeals, you can ask yourself, okay, is the barrier happening because of an ethos thing, because they don't trust who I am or they don't trust me? Is it happening because there's a mismatch in understanding? That's the logos. Does the argument not make sense? Or is it happening because I'm not interpreting what they need to feel correctly? You hit those 3 things, you start thinking about your conversations that way, your meetings, your speeches, anything from those angles, and you'll be able to really improve the efficiency and efficacy of your communication. But it pulls you out of the situation and makes you look at things through the other person's lenses.
I couldn't agree more. I absolutely love the focus on, is it something that I'm doing? Is it something that I'm missing, in tandem with what do they need to experience, and are they getting that experience?
Yeah.
Just as a semi joke, I guess, I spend a lot of times, I'm sure you do too, spending in rooms with very smart people who are struggling beyond words to understand why their perfectly rational solution won't fix somebody else's emotional problem. Yeah. And I have to stand there and like be entertained just long enough before getting involved. And I think you just illustrated that with those 3 rhetorical appeals. But there was something within that you talked about, which was maintaining trust throughout the process. Mm-hmm. So from your standpoint, if we do need to move somebody from how they're thinking or feeling now to thinking or feeling in a different way that's maybe more in line with what we need them to do within ethical guardrails, of course.
Yeah.
What are some of your techniques for moving them throughout that process while ensuring that we maintain trust and credibility?
One of the first things that I like to do is to get them talking. I want to give them the space. You want to give them the space and the safety net to tell you what's going on in their heads and what they are thinking about this situation. What problems do they see? What issues are coming up on their end? You're saying that everything's all right, but this is what I'm seeing. Could you tell me more about that? And then open the door. And excuse me, you might need to open that door repeatedly if you're operating in a low trust environment. But the more you give the people who report to you the opportunity to let you into their heads, the more trust is going to be gathered up. What you're also doing there by spending a lot of time right up front, getting them talking and listening to them, is you are listening for the words that they're using and for the angle that they're approaching it in. Then you adjust your communication to fit that. So if they're talking, now this does not necessarily mean that all that you're doing is pandering to people's points of view and telling them what they want to hear. It isn't at all. It's about figuring out what framework they're in. So if they're talking about something, an example I like to give is if you are speaking to, let's say, a stakeholder who is really risk averse, there's this person's personality, everything makes them anxious. They're very cautious. Maybe the business just took a big hit and they just lost a chunk of their interest in the business. You come up, you have this great idea. There's this wonderful process that we're going to use. It's going to fix everything. It is so innovative. It is first to market. No one else has tried this before. This is a wonderful thing. You want to take them from worry to confidence, right? But using risk-heavy language like first to market, innovative, cutting edge, no one else has done this, is going to terrify them. So that little emotional journey won't happen. They won't trust you. You're not in the same wavelength. If you get them speaking and getting them voicing all of their concerns, you can pick up on what kind of words might help them feel more comforted. If it's unpredictable, they keep saying it's unpredictable, we don't know what's going to happen, then you want to talk about predictability, right? It's a giant green flag. If they are worrying that this thing is going to happen again, this disaster that happened last time is going to happen again, okay, we need to talk about mitigations. Here are all of the safety nets that we've set up. If you give them time to talk and really listen, you'll figure out what they need to hear from you. So get other people talking first, always, always, always. And don't be afraid to take more than one run at this conversation, especially if it's a tough one. You might need to break it into 2, 3, 4, or 5 conversations if it's a complicated problem or if you're dealing with really heightened emotions, so that people can take their time to digest and not get overwhelmed with everything that's being shared.
All tremendous points. Don't just don't just get the words, but what do those words mean? What do they say about their emotional context? Speak to that, adapt. So great. I love every single point you're making. I'm just trying not to echo and repeat everything that you're saying.
Well, and if I may, this goes up the ladder as well. 100%. You were talking about these are all the good reasons. This is all the logical stuff. When I am helping highly technical teams like engineers, accountants, financial people who are really deep into technical info, figure out how to speak to the C-suite, very often it's actually helping them realize that the C-suite is not thinking about your research development or your product or whatever in the same way that you are. They're not an engineer. If they were an engineer, they've been out of it for a while. They haven't been working in the weeds like you have. So you got to look at it from their angle. Let go of some of those technical specs that are so desperately important to you in your work, because that's not the work of the chief operations officer. They need to look at it from a higher angle. So if the COO asks you for little bits of technical information, cool, go there, if they take you there. But otherwise, you still need to be saying, how is this other person actually using this info? And then letting go of all of the reasons, the proofs, the evidence that are so important to you in your work, and focus on what's important to them in their work.
How are they using their info? Great point. Yeah. Start with their outcomes and work backwards from there. I worked with a friend of mine, one of the smartest human beings I've ever met. And everything she does is so deeply rooted in science. And she asked me to go over a presentation that she had been giving that hadn't been netting their results. And I had to look at it for 5 seconds before my brain exploded. And I had a conversational understanding of the science she was trying to explain. And I had to tell her, this is not what they want. Yeah. They brought you in here because they assume that you know the science. So we have to give them what they want, illustrate that it's backed up by science, and then let them ask. And if they ask, the leash comes off the nerd. You can get into as deep as you want about science, but it's not what they're looking for. So starting from what their outcomes and what they want and coming back to our expertise or what we focus on is so very important. Create that receptiveness. Create the opportunity before we go there, if we have to go there at all. I'm keeping an eye on the clock because I know you're busy, and I still only have probably 27 questions left that I was going to ask you, but there's one that I want to get into because so much of what you're talking about really is taking situational awareness, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, understanding what the audience needs, putting it together, and maybe not fully customizing every conversation, but to steal your word, deliberately adapting how we communicate with audiences based on the totality of circumstances. I'm curious, in your experience so far anyway, how well does AI do that?
Oh, and yes, your editor may leave in that strangled little cry that I gave.
Oh, we will.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
For the record, I wasn't strangling her, but we're going to leave it in there.
This is listener, this is true. There isn't a black and white answer. AI is not wholly good nor wholly bad, as I'm sure everyone listening to this knows. It is a very useful tool as a thinking partner, as something that you can bounce ideas off of, as a second pair of eyeballs on that thing you wrote at 10 o'clock at night that you need to send out, but oh, you also know that you're really tired. And maybe something else or someone else should read this before you hit send. Very useful for that. Where I caution people with the use of AI, there's a few areas. One of them is surrendering entirely to AI all of your report writing functions, all of your technical writing functions, and so on, because that's hard mental work. Communication is hard, and it takes a lot of time. And it can be very tempting to, dump all of the files into whatever platform you're using, saying, here is all the contextual stuff, write the report. What tends to happen is that people then do not read the thing or review it as carefully as they intend to. And stuff starts to slip. That's always something that I'm really worried about. What also happens if you begin surrendering too much of that writing function or that communication function, the email function to AI, your own skills in doing that will also start to slip. Communication is a muscle. Listening is a muscle. Speaking and writing is a muscle, and you must exercise it. So on one hand, it does some heavy lifting. On the other hand, eventually it's going to make the lifting heavier because those little muscles are going to be weaker. Where I really run into difficulties with AI is when I get leaders who are using it to write their speeches for them. And I don't necessarily mean the big old keynotes. I also mean things like the little addresses that you might give at the all hands meeting, or one of the emails that you're sending out to another member of your team. We can usually tell when a bot's written it. Are the bots getting better? Absolutely they are. But where I find it's problematic is that especially with the speeches, is that when we turn it over to AI, you have to keep in mind that they are large language models. They are pulling from whatever their training data is, usually for communication. They're pulling from the entire internet, and they are predicting the words that will be said next, which means it will be the most common words. It's going to sound like everyone else. That's the big issue. Does it sound like a human? Yes, it does. But it sounds like any human. Therefore, not you. So if you are giving a speech, people are there listening to you, wanting to be inside your head. They want to be in Michael's head, not Claude's version of Michael's. So if we don't hear the words that we know that you normally use, if you're not speaking in a cadence that you wouldn't normally use, we pull it out really, really fast, and the trust is broken almost immediately. A bot wrote that. You're just parroting its words. So I really do caution leaders, do not give over that important communication to AI. You can use it as an editor. Very helpful. But it has to sound like you. That means you have to write it.
Yeah. Use it as an editor.
It's hard work.
Use it for tone, some of those things, but it's not a get out of jail free. You don't have to do it anymore. I love what you said, that it takes from the whole internet, so it uses common words the way everybody else speaks, which is true. I'm not an expert by any stretch, but I also think that it uses like the median. So it's not even using the good words. It's not even using the better. Like, it's coming down to average or below. And depending on our audience, that could be a huge problem. And by no means is it specified to our audience. And even if you type in for a sales team, well, how many different iterations of sales teams are there around the world? In personalities, relationship, history, experience, all of these things. So you're getting, at best, an average general message that is curated for a general audience, not your specific audience. And your point about destroying trust is so critical, because when somebody says, oh, AI wrote that for you, what they take that to mean is you didn't care enough about me or us to do it yourself. So now what you're really communicating is laziness, lack of caring, lack of attention, that this conversation was just another check in the box. And now that you're done with less stress for you, because AI put it together, now we're left wondering what's really going on. What does this really mean? How do you really feel? What are we really missing? And at least at this point, it creates way more problems than it solves.
Yeah, absolutely. It telegraphs all the wrong things, even if you used it because you had to get it out and you're exhausted and there's 18 different plates and you had a lot of good reasons. People won't smell it that way. It won't sniff out based on that. And along the same token, there is also a huge opportunity here as more communication starts getting done by AI. An area that I think every leader should have always polished but will become increasingly important is the ability to speak well extemporaneously, so improv, in front of other people about the thing that you are an area expert in. Because if you can do that off the cuff speaking on your business, on the thing that it is you produce, on whatever subject it is that they're speaking to you about, that demonstrates true domain mastery. It can't be coming from an AI because you're doing it live in front of people. Isn't that impressive? And being able to do that is a skill, so you got to practice it. AI, by the way, can be a great tool to practice it with, because you can fire back and forth with questions and answers. It can ask you questions, you answer it. It asks you another question, you answer it. So there's still room to use it, but it never replaces your communication abilities.
I think that's the message for sure, not to use it as a replacement. And that's another great point, that as communication becomes homogenized in many ways, that those who can stand out and speak on their own 2 feet, that skill will be a differentiating factor, because you can't fake it. You've got to know it. You can't rely on somebody else. So, and potentially, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but as people allegedly get more and more focused on digital communication and lack interpersonal communication, makes it even that much more of a valuable skill to practice and develop, which is what you work with people to teach them how to do. So although I could keep asking you questions, and hopefully I can have you back to dive into the things that we didn't get into another time, please explain to people, what's the work that you do? Where can they find you? How can they follow you? How can they stay up to date with what you're doing every day?
So my whole bag is that I help leaders and organizations leverage the science, the art, and the alchemy of communication, and especially speaking skills. And it's alchemy because there is always going to be that little je ne sais quoi that goes into it, and that is you. That's the alchemy, is you. And it brings together the science and the art. So a lot of the work that I do does focus on helping people understand how to make their message impactful, whether it's an engineering report to your COO and CFO, or whether it's a keynote that you're giving as the guest at your industry conference. How do you know what they need to hear, and how do you get it across? That's what I help you figure out.
Well, I will have the links to your website, because I've been there, and the links to your books and all of your information in the show notes, so people can link to you directly. Lauren, I have completely enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so very much. I appreciate all the energy and expertise you brought and you shared. It's been my pleasure, and I hope we can do it again.
Such a pleasure, Michael. I'd love to come back.
Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Lauren, thank you for a great conversation. I really appreciate all the depth that you went into and all the examples that you shared. Thank you so very much. I was taking notes the whole time. I hope everybody else was as well. Just to highlight a few things really quick before we turn this off. I really, really think it is so important for people to stop and consider how you talked about recognizing the person who speaks up the ladder is carrying all the risk. All too often, we let that fact escape us, and we judge people without recognizing that. So very important. As is the importance of follow-up. If we don't follow up with people, we can't prove to them that we listened or they're important to us. And I really, really like how you talked about it's our responsibility to take people from anxious to reassured. Great conversation. I appreciate everything you shared. Thank you so very much. And of course, thank you to everyone that came back for another week to listen to the conversation. We truly appreciate you continuing to come back and listen. Thank you very much. Again, hopefully you got a ton out of that conversation as well. While you're here, we really would appreciate it if you took just a moment to subscribe to the show, like the show, leave us a review, your feedback, share it with your network. Thank you so very much. And of course, while you're on the internet today, please check out our sponsors. Head over to humantel.com. That's where you can learn all about their best-in-class online training to recognize when people's emotions are shifting by accurately interpreting changes in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. Use the code INQUASIVE25 to get 25% off the training of your choice on their website. For the professional interviewers, head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. Get all the information you need and all your questions answered about the International Association of Interviewers, both at the national level and at the chapter level, as well as the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. And of course, head over to inquasive.com to learn more about the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, negotiation teams, and so much more when they ask us to teach them how to uncover hidden value in their high impact conversations. We really appreciate you being here for another week. Thank you so much. Stay safe. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time.